Musketeers. We are going to be picking up with chapter 33. And of course we'll start with our usual intention setting and space clearing ritual. So without further ado, just sit back, and close your eyes, and relax. Go ahead and start with setting our intention. Safety purposes, I'm just going to take off the nails for this hand. Do it quick. That tonight's reading accomplish the greatest and highest good for all. Okay. Go. Alright, and now we will do our lavender essential oil space clearing. shake it up real quick because you know oil and water doesn't mix really well, right? Alright, here we go. Go. Some over here. And then some over here. Okay. Let's take a few deep breaths. Now it's time for our incense smoke cleanse. Today we have white sage. As I said last time, it makes quite a mess. Crystal or book. Mister, quick side note, I mispronounced it soubrette, but it's actually soubrette. So the title of this chapter is Soubrette and Mistress. In the meantime, in spite of the cries of his conscience and the wise counsels of Athos, D'Artagnan became hourly more in love with Milady. Thus he never failed to pay his diurnal court to her. And the self-satisfied Gascon was convinced that sooner or later she could not fail to respond to him. He was gonna break her down, y'all. One day when he arrived with his head in the air, and as light at heart as a man who is in expectation of a shower of gold, he found the soubrette under the gateway of the hotel. But this time the pretty Kitty was not contented with touching him as he passed. She took him gently by the hand. Good, thought D'Artagnan, she is charged with some message for me from her mistress. She's about to appoint some meeting which she had not courage to speak of, and he looked down at the pretty girl with the most triumphant air imaginable. I wish to say 3 words to you, Monsieur le Chevalier, stammered the soubrette. Chevalier, excuse me. Speak, my dear, speak, said D'Artagnan, I'm all attention. Here, that's impossible. That which I have to say is too long, and still more, too secret. Well, what is to be done? If Monsieur le Chevalier would follow me, said Kitty friendly. Were you pleased, my pretty little dear? Come then. And Kitty, who had not let go of the hand of D'Artagnan, led him up a little dark winding staircase. And after ascending about 15 steps, opened a door. Come in here, Monsieur le Chevalier, said she. Here we shall be alone and can talk safely. And whose chamber is this, my pretty-faced friend? It is mine, Monsieur le Chevalier. It communicates with my mistress is by that door. But you need not fear, she will not hear what we say. She never goes to bed before midnight. D'Artagnan cast a glance around him. The little apartment was charming for its taste and neatness. But in spite of himself, his eyes were directed to that door which Kitty said led to Milady's chamber. Kitty guessed what was passing in the mind of the young man and heaved a deep sigh. You love my mistress then very dearly, Monsieur le Chevalier, said she. Oh, more than I can say, Kitty, I am mad for her. Kitty breathed a second sigh. Alas, Monsieur, said she, that is a great pity. What the devil do you see so pitiable in it, said D'Artagnan. Because, Monsieur, replied Kitty, my mistress does not love you at all. Hein, said D'Artagnan, can she have changed her to tell me so? Hein, said D'Artagnan, can she have charged her to tell me so? Oh no, Monsieur, out of the regard I have for you, I have taken upon myself to tell you so. I am much obliged, my dear Kitty, but for the intention only, for the information, you must agree, is not likely to be very pleasant. That is to say, you don't believe what I have told you, is it not? We have always some difficulty in believing such things, my pretty dear, were it only from self-love. Then you don't believe me. Why, I confess that, unless you give me some proof of what you advance. What do you think of this? And Kitty drew a little note from her bosom. For me, said D'Artagnan, seizing the letter. No, for another, yes. His name, cried D'Artagnan. Read the address. Monsieur le Comte de Wardes. The remembrance of the scene at Saint-Germain presented itself to the mind of the presumptuous Gascon. As quick as he thought, he tore open the letter, in spite of the cry which Kitty uttered, on seeing what he was going to do, or rather what he was doing. Oh, good Lord, Monsieur le Chevalier, said she, what are you doing? Oh, I, said D'Artagnan, nothing. And he read, you have not answered my first note. Are you indisposed, or have you forgot the glances you favored me with at the ball of Madame Tigouise? You have an opportunity now. Count, do not allow it to escape. D'Artagnan became very pale. He was wounded in his self-love. He thought that it was in his love. Poor dear Monsieur D'Artagnan, said Kitty in a voice full of compassion, and pressing the young man's hand again. You pity me, my kind little creature, said D'Artagnan. That I do, it is to be in love. You know what it is to be in love, said D'Artagnan, looking at her for the first time with much attention. Alas, yes. Well then, instead of pitying me, you would do much better to assist me in revenging myself of your mistress. And what sort of revenge would you take? I would triumph over her and supplant my rival. I will never help you in that, Monsieur le Chevalier, said Kitty warmly. Why not? For 2 reasons. What are they? The first is that my mistress will never love you. How do you know that? You have offended her to the very heart. I? In what can I have offended her? I, who ever since I have known her, have lived at her feet like a slave. Speak, I beg of you. I will never confess that, but to the man who should reach the bottom of my soul. D'Artagnan looked at Kitty for the second time. The young girl was of a freshness and beauty which many duchesses would have purchased with their coronets. Kitty, said he, I will read to the bottom of your soul whenever you like. Don't let that disturb you. And he gave her a kiss, at which the poor girl became as red as a cherry. Oh no, said Kitty, it is not me you love. It is my mistress you love. You told me so only just now. And does that hinder you from telling me the second reason? The second reason, Monsieur le Chevalier, replied Kitty, emboldened by the kiss in the first place and still further by the expression of the eyes of the young man, is that in love everyone for herself. Then only D'Artagnan remembered the languishing glances of Kitty, her constantly meeting him in the antechamber, the corridor, or on the stairs, those touches of the hand every time she did meet him, and her deep sighs, but absorbed by his desire to please the great lady, he had disdained the soubrette. He whose game is the eagle takes no heed of the sparrow. But this time our Gascon saw at a glance all the advantages that might be derived from the love which Kitty had just confessed so innocently or so boldly. The interception of letters addressed to the Count de Ward's intelligences on the spot, entrance at all hours into Kitty's chamber, which was contagious to her mistress. The perfidious deceiver was, as may plainly be perceived, already sacrificing an idea of the poor girl to obtain Milady, whether she would or not. Well, said he to the young girl, are you willing, my dear Kitty, that I should give you a proof of that love of which you doubt? What love? Asked the girl. Of that which I am ready to feel for you. And what is that proof? Are you willing that I should this evening pass with you the time I generally spend with your mistress? Oh yes, said Kitty, clapping her hands. Very willing. Very willing. Well then, come here, my dear, said D'Artagnan, establishing himself in a fauteuil. Come and let me tell you that you are the prettiest soubrette I ever saw. And he did tell her so much and so well that the poor girl, who asked nothing better than to believe him, did believe him. Nevertheless, to D'Artagnan's great astonishment, the pretty Kitty defended herself with resolution. In such conversations, time passes very rapidly. 12 o'clock struck, and almost at the same time, the bell was rung in Milady's chamber. Good God, cried Kitty, there is my mistress calling me. Go directly. D'Artagnan rose, took his hat as if it had been his intention to obey, then opening quickly the door of a large closet instead of that of the staircase, he plunged into the midst of robes and the ladies' dressing gowns. What are you doing? Cried Kitty. D'Artagnan, who secured the key, shut himself up in the closet without any reply. Well, cried my lady in a sharp voice, are you asleep that you don't answer when I ring? And D'Artagnan heard the door of communication open violently. Here am I, my lady, here am I, cried Kitty, springing forward to meet her mistress. Both went into the bedroom, and as the door of communication remained open, D'Artagnan could hear Milady for some time scolding her maid. She was at length, however, appeased, and the conversation turned upon him while Kitty was assisting her mistress to undress. Well, said Milady, I have not seen our Gascon this evening. What, Milady, has he not been? Said Kitty. Can he be inconstant before being happy? Oh no, he must have been prevented by Monsieur de Treville or Monsieur de Cessards. I understand my game, Kitty. I have him safe. What will you do with him, madam? What will I do with him? Oh, Kitty, there is something between that man and me that he is quite ignorant of. He was very near making me lose my credit with his eminence. Oh, I will be revenged for that. I thought said Kitty. Your son was the only heir of his uncle, and until his coming of age he would have had the enjoyment of his fortune. D'Artagnan shuddered to his very marrow at hearing this apparently sweet creature reproach him with that sharp voice, which she took such pains to conceal in conversation for not having killed a man whom he had seen load her with kindness. For all this, continued my lady, I should long ago have revenged myself on him, and I don't know why. The cardinal had not requested me to conciliate him. Oh yes, but Madame has not favored the little woman he was so fond of. What, the mercer's wife of the Rue des Fossoyeurs? Has he not already forgotten she ever existed? Fine vengeance that, ma foi. A cold sweat broke from D'Artagnan's brow. Why, this woman was a monster. He resumed his listening, but unfortunately the toilet was ended. That will do, said Milady. Go into your own room, and tomorrow endeavor again to obtain me an answer to the letter I gave you. For Monsieur de Wardes, said Kitty. To be sure, for Monsieur de Wardes. Now, there is one, said Kitty, who appears to me to be quite a different sort of man. After that poor Monsieur D'Artagnan. Go to bed, mademoiselle, and Milady. I don't like comments. D'Artagnan heard the door close and the noise of two bolts, by which Milady fastened herself in on her side, but as softly as possible Kitty turned the key of the lock, and then D'Artagnan opened the closet door. Oh, good Lord, said Kitty in a low voice, what is the matter with you? How pale you are. The abominable creature, murmured D'Artagnan. Silence, be gone, said Kitty. There is nothing but a wainscot between my chamber and Milady's. Every word that is uttered in one can be heard in the other. That's exactly the reason I won't go, said D'Artagnan. What, said Kitty, blushing. Or at least I will go later. And he put his arm around her waist. D'Artagnan's love for Kitty was little more than an idea of vengeance upon Milady. With a little more heart, he might have been contented with his new conquest, but the principal features of his character were ambition and pride. It must, however, be confessed in his justification that the first use he made of the influence he had obtained over Kitty was to endeavor to find out what had become of Madame Bonacieux. But the poor girl swore the crucifix to D'Artagnan that she was entirely ignorant of that head, her mistress never admitting her and to have her secrets, only she believed she was able to say she was not dead. As to the cause, which was here making Milady lose the confidence of the cardinal, Kitty knew nothing about it, but this time D'Artagnan was better informed than she was, as he had seen Milady on board a vessel at the moment he was leaving England. He suspected that it was almost without a doubt on account of the diamond studs. But what was clearest in all this was that the true hatred, the profound hatred, the inveterate hatred of Milady was increased by his not having killed her brother-in-law. D'Artagnan came the next day to Milady's, and finding her in a very ill humor, had no doubt that it was having no answer from Monsieur de Wardes that provoked her thus. Kitty came in, but Milady was very cross with her. The poor girl ventured a glance at D'Artagnan, which said, "See how I suffer on your account." Toward the end of the evening, however, the beautiful lioness became milder. She smilingly listened to the soft speeches of D'Artagnan, and even gave him her hand to kiss. D'Artagnan at parting scarcely knew what to think, but as he was a youth not easily imposed upon, while continuing to pay his court to Milady, he determined to carry out the little plan he had framed in his mind. He found Kitty at the gate, and, as on the preceding evening, went up to her chamber. Kitty had been accused of negligence and consequently severely scolded. Milady could not at all comprehend the silence of the Count de Wardes, and she ordered Kitty to come at 9 o'clock in the morning to take a third letter. D'Artagnan made Kitty promise to bring him that letter on the following morning. The poor girl promised all her lover desired. She was mad. I guess madly in love. Things passed as they had done the night before. D'Artagnan concealed himself in the closet. Milady called, undressed, sent away Kitty, and shut the door. time, the poor girl did not even hesitate at giving up the note to D'Artagnan. She belonged body and soul to the handsome soldier. D'Artagnan opened the letter and read as follows. This is the third time I have written to you to tell you that I love you. Beware that I do not write you a fourth time to tell you that I detest you. If you repent of the manner in which you have acted toward me, the young girl who brings you this will tell you how a man of spirit may obtain his pardon. D'Artagnan colored and grew pale several times while reading this billet. Oh, you love her still, said Kitty, who had not taken her eyes off the young man's countenance for an instant. No, Kitty, you are mistaken. I do not love her, but I will revenge myself for her contempt of me. Oh, yes, I know what sort of vengeance. You told me that. Of what consequence can it be to you, Kitty? You know it is you alone I love. How can I be sure of that? By the scorn I will throw upon her. D'Artagnan took a pen and wrote, Madam, until the present moment I could not believe that it was to me your first two letters were addressed. So unworthy did I feel myself of such an honor. Besides, I was so seriously indisposed that I could not in any case have replied to them. But now I am forced to believe in the excess of your kindness, since not only your letter but your servant assures me that I have the good fortune to be beloved by you. She has no occasion to teach me the way in which a man of spirit may obtain his pardon. I will come and ask mine at 11 o'clock this evening. To delay it a single day would be, in my eyes, now to commit a fresh offense. He whom you have rendered the happiest of men. Come to words. This note was in the first place a forgery. It was likewise an indelicacy. It was even, according to our present manners, something like an infamous action. But at that period people were not so scrupulous. Besides, D'Artagnan, from her own admission, knew Milady to be treacherous in matters of more importance, and could entertain no respect for her. And yet, notwithstanding this want of respect, he felt an uncontrollable passion for this woman boiling in his veins, passion drunk with contempt, but passion or thirst, as the reader pleases. D'Artagnan's plan was very simple. By Kitty's chamber he gained that of his mistress. He would take advantage of the first moment of surprise, shame, and terror. He might fail, but something must be left to chance. In 8 days the campaign was to open, and he would be compelled to leave Paris. D'Artagnan had no time for a prolonged love siege. There, said this young man, handing Kitty the letter, sealed and addressed. Give that to Milady. It is the Count de Ward's reply. Poor Kitty became as pale as death. She suspected what the letter contained. Listen, my dear girl, said D'Artagnan. You cannot but perceive that all this must end some way or other. Milady may discover that you gave the first billet to my lackey instead of to De Ward's, and that it is I who have opened the others, which ought to have been opened by him. Milady will then turn you out of doors, and you know she is not the woman to let her vengeance stop there. Ah, said Kitty, for whom I have exposed myself to all that. For me, I well know, my sweet girl, said D'Artagnan, but I am grateful. But what does this note contain? Milady will tell you. Ah, you do not love me, cried Kitty, and I am very wretched. In spite of the caresses with which D'Artagnan endeavored to console her, Kitty wept for some time before she could be persuaded to give her mistress the note, but she yielded at last. Read a lot so far. same day as that on which Kitty went to D'Artagnan. Soon as Kitty left him, D'Artagnan directed his steps toward the Rue Ferrou. He found Athos and Aramis philosophizing. Aramis had some slight inclination to resume the cassock. Athos, according to his system, neither encouraged nor dissuaded him. Athos was an advocate that everyone should be left to his own free will. He never gave advice but when it was asked, and even then he required it to be asked twice. People in general, he said, only asked advice not to follow it, or if they did follow it, it was for the sake of having someone to blame for having given it. Porthos arrived a minute after D'Artagnan, and the four friends were all assembled. The four countenances expressed four different feelings: that of Porthos, tranquility; that of D'Artagnan, hope; that of Aramis, uneasiness; that of Athos, carelessness. At the end of a moment's conversation, in which Porthos hinted that a lady of elevated rank had condescended to relieve him from his embarrassment, Mousqueton entered. He came to request his master to come home instantly. His presence was very urgent. "It is my equipment." "Is it my equipment?" "Yes and no," replied Mousqueton. "Well, but can't you speak? Come home, monsieur." Porthos rose, saluted his friends, and followed Mousqueton. An instant after, Bazin made his appearance at the door. "What do you want with me, my friend?" said Aramis, with that mildness of language which was observable in him every time that his ideas were directed toward the church. "A man wishes to see monsieur at home," replied Bazin. "A man? What man?" "A mendicant." "Give him alms, Bazin, and bid him pray for a poor sinner." "But this mendicant insists upon speaking to you and pretends that you will be very glad to see him." "He has sent no particular message for me." "Yes, if Monsieur Aramis hesitates to come," he said, "tell him I am from Tours." "From Tours?" cried Aramis. "1,000 pardons, gentlemen, but no doubt this man brings me the news I expected." Rising, he went off at a quick pace. There then only remained Athos and D'Artagnan. "I believe these fellows have managed their business." "What do you think, D'Artagnan?" said Athos. "I know that Porthos was in a fair way," replied D'Artagnan, "and as to Aramis, to tell you the truth, I have never been uneasy on his account. But you, my dear Athos, you who so generously distributed the Englishman's pistols, which were your legitimate property, what do you mean to do?" "I am satisfied with having killed that man, my good lad, seeing that it is blessed bread to kill an Englishman. But if I had pocketed his pistols, they would have weighed me down like a remorse." Athos, you have truly inconceivable ideas." "Well, leave that. What do you think of Monsieur de Treville telling me when he did the honor to call upon me yesterday, that you associated with the suspected English whom the cardinal protects? That is to say, I visit an Englishwoman, the one I named to you." "Oh, the fair woman on whose account I gave you advice which naturally you took care not to adopt." "I gave you my reasons." "Yes, you looked to the connection for your equipment, I think you said." "Not at all. I have acquired certain knowledge that the woman was concerned in the carrying off of Madame Bonacieux." "Yes, I understand now. To find one woman, you make love to another. It is the longest road, but certainly the most amusing." D'Artagnan was on the point of telling Athos all, but one consideration restrained him. Athos was a gentleman, and was punctilious in all that concerned honor, and there were in all the plans which her lover had devised with regard to Milady. He was sure certain things that would not obtain his approbation. He was therefore silent, and as Athos was the least curious of any man on earth, D'Artagnan's confidence stopped there. We will therefore leave the two friends who had nothing important to communicate to each other to follow Aramis. Upon being informed that the person who wanted to speak to him came from Tours, we have seen with what rapidity the young man followed, or rather went before Bazin. He ran without stopping from the Rue Ferrand to the Rue des Vanguards. On entering, he found a man of short stature and intelligent eyes, but covered with rags. "Did you ask for me?" said the musketeer. "I wish to speak with Monsieur Aramis. Is that your name, Monsieur? Yes, you have brought me something. Yes, if you can show me a certain embroidered handkerchief. Here it is, said Aramis, taking a small key from his breast and opening a little ebony box inlaid with mother of pearl. Here it is, look. That is right, replied the mendicant. Dismiss your lackey. In fact, Basine, curious to know what the mendicant could want with his master, kept pace with him as well as he could, and arrived almost at the same time he did. But this quickness was not of much use to him. At the hint from the mendicant, his master made him a sign to retire, and he was obliged to obey. Basine being gone, the mendicant cast a rapid glance around him in order to be sure that nobody could either see or hear him, and opening his ragged vest, badly held together by a leather strip, he began to unsew the upper part of his doublet, from which he drew a letter. Aramis uttered a cry of joy at the sight of the seal, kissed the superscription with an almost religious respect, and opened the epistle, which contained what follows. My friend, it is the will of fate that we should still be for some time separated, but the delightful days of youth are not lost beyond return. Perform your duty in camp, I will do mine elsewhere, except that which the bearer brings you. Make the campaign like a handsome true gentleman, and think of me. Oh, tenderly kiss your dear black eyes. Adieu, or rather, au revoir. The mendicant continued to unsew his garments, and drew from amid his rags 150 Spanish double pistols, which he laid down on the table. Then he opened the door, bowed, and went out before the young man, stupefied by the letter, had ventured to address a word to him. Aramis then re-perused the letter and perceived there was a postscript. P.S. You may behave politely to the bearer, who is a count and a grandee of Spain. Golden dreams, cried Aramis. Oh, beautiful life, yes, we were young, yes, we shall yet have happy days. Oh, my love, my blood, my life, all are thine, my adored mistress. And he kissed the letter with passion, without even vouchsafing a look at the gold which sparkled on the table. Basine scratched at the door, and as Aramis had no longer had any reason to exclude him, he bade him come in. Basine was stupefied at the sight of the gold, and forgot that he came to announce D'Artagnan, who, curious to know who the mendicant could be, came to Aramis's residence on leaving that of Athos. Now, as D'Artagnan used no ceremony with Aramis, seeing that Basine forgot to announce him, he announced himself. The devil, my dear Aramis, said D'Artagnan, if these are the prunes that are sent to you from Tours, I beg you will make my compliments to the gardener who gathers them. Your mistaken friend, D'Artagnan, said Aramis, always on his guard. This is from my bookseller, who has just sent me the price of that poem in one-syllable verse which I began yonder. Ah, indeed, said D'Artagnan. Well, your bookseller's very generous, that's all I can say. How, monsieur, cried Basine, a poem sells so dear? As that, it is incredible. You can write as much as you like. You may become equal to Monsieur Voiture and Monsieur Penserade. I like that. A poet is as good as an happy. Ah, Monsieur Aramis, become a poet, I beg of you. Basine, my friend, said Aramis, I believe you are interfering with my conversation. Basine perceived he was wrong. He bowed and went out. Ah, said D'Artagnan with a smile. You sell your productions at their weight in gold. You are very fortunate, my friend, but take care, or else you will lose that letter which is peeping out from your doublet, and which comes no doubt from your bookseller likewise. Aramis blushed to the eyes, crammed in the letter, and rebuttoned his doublet. My dear D'Artagnan, said he, if you please, we will join our friends. As I am rich, we will today begin to dine together again, expecting that you will be rich in your turn. Ma foi, said D'Artagnan with great pleasure. It is long since we have had a good dinner together, and I, for my part, have a somewhat hazardous expedition for this evening, and shall not be so sorry, I confess, to fortify myself with a few glasses of good old Burgundy. Agreed. As to the old Burgundy, I have no objection to that, said Aramis, removed the letter, and the gold had removed, as by magic, his ideas of retreat. And having put 2 or 3 double pistols into his pockets to answer the calls of the moment, he placed the others Aramis in the ebony box, inlaid with mother of pearl, in which was the famous handkerchief, which served him as a talisman. The two friends repaired to Athos's dwelling, and he, faithful to his vow of not going out, took upon him to order dinner to be brought to them. DoorDash, maybe. As he was perfectly acquainted with the details of gastronomy, D'Artagnan and Aramis made no difficulty in abandoning this important care to him. They went to find Porthos, and at the corner of the Rue Mousqueton, who, with the most pitiable air, was driving before him a mule and a horse. D'Artagnan uttered a cry of surprise, which was not quite free from joy. "There's my yellow horse, Aramis," cried he. "Look at that horse." "Oh, the frightful brute," said Aramis. "Well," replied D'Artagnan, "upon that very horse I came to Paris." "What, does Monsieur know this horse?" said Mousqueton. "It is of a singular color," said Aramis. "I never saw one with such a hide in my life." "I can well believe you did not," replied D'Artagnan, "and that was how I got 3 crowns for him. It must have been for his hide, for certes, the carcass is not worth 18 livres. But how did this horse come into your hands, Mousqueton?" "Pray," said the lackey, "say nothing about it, monsieur. It is a frightful trick played us by the husband of our duchess." "How has it come about, Mousqueton? Why, we are looked upon with a rather favorable eye by a lady of quality, the Duchess of... But your pardon, my master has commanded me to be discreet. She has forced us to accept, as a little keepsake, a magnificent Spanish genet and an Andalusian mule, which were beautiful to look upon. The husband heard of the affair on their way. He seized the 2 magnificent beasts which were being sent to us, and substituted these horrible animals in their places." "Which you are taking back to him, I suppose," said D'Artagnan. "Exactly so, monsieur," replied Mousqueton. "You may well believe that we will not accept such deeds as these in exchange for those which had been promised to us. No, partout, though I should like to have seen Porthos upon my yellow horse. That would give me an idea of how I looked upon my arrival in Paris. But don't let us hinder you, Mousqueton. Go and perform your master's orders. Is he at home?" "Yes, monsieur," said Mousqueton, "but in a very ill humor." "Go on," said, and he continued his way toward the Quai des Grands Augustins, while the 2 friends went to ring at the bell of the unfortunate Porthos. He, having seen them crossing the yard, took care not to answer, and they rang in vain. In the meanwhile, Mousqueton continued on his way, and crossing the Pont Neuf, still driving the 2 sorry animals before him, he reached the Rue aux Ours. When arrived there, he fastened, according to the orders of his master, both the horse and mule to the knocker of the procurer's door. Then, without taking any heed of their future fate, he returned to Porthos and told him that his commission was completed. In a short time, the 2 unfortunate beasts, who had not eaten anything since the morning, made such noise with the knocker that the procureur ordered his boy clerk to go on and inquire in the neighborhood to whom this horse and mule belonged. Madame Coquenard recognized her present, and could not at first comprehend this restitution, but the visit of Porthos soon enlightened her. The anger which fired the eyes of the musketeer, in spite of his efforts to suppress it, terrified his sensitive lover. In fact, Mousqueton had not concealed from his master that he had met D'Artagnan and Aramis, and that D'Artagnan and the yellow horse had recognized the Bernese pony upon which he had come to Paris, and which he had sold for 3 crowns. Porthos went away after having appointed a meeting with the procureurs in the cloisters of St. Magloire. The procureur, seeing he was going, invited him to dinner, an invitation which the musketeer refused with an air of majesty. Madame Coquenard repaired, trembling, to the cloisters of St. Magloire, for she guessed the reproaches that awaited her there, but she was fascinated by the lofty airs of Porthos. All that which a man wounded in his self-love could let fall in the shape of imprecations and reproaches upon the head of a woman, Porthos let fall upon the bowed head of his procureur. "Alas," said said she. "I did all for the best. One of our clients is a horse dealer. He owes money to the office and was backward in his pay. I took the mule and the horse for what he owed us. He assured me that they were two noble steeds." "Well, madam," said Porthos, "if he owed you more than 5 crowns, your horse dealer is a thief." "There is no harm in endeavoring to buy things cheap, Monsieur Porthos," said the procurer, seeking to excuse herself. "No, madam, but they who so earnestly try to buy things cheap ought to permit others to seek more generous friends." And Porthos, turning on his heel, made a step to retire. Monsieur Porthos," cried the procuress, "I have been wrong. I confess it. I had not to have driven a bargain when the matter was to equip a cavalier like you." Porthos, without reply, retreated a second step. The procuress fancied she saw him in a brilliant cloud, all surrounded by duchesses and marquises who cast bags of money at his feet. "Stop, in the name of heaven, Monsieur Porthos," cried she. "Stop and let us talk." "Talking with you brings me misfortune," said Porthos. "But tell me, what do you ask?" "Nothing, for that amounts to the same thing as if I asked you for something." The procuress hung herself upon the arm of Porthos, and in the violence of her grief she cried out, "Monsieur Porthos, I am ignorant of all such matters. How should I know what a horse is? How should I know what horse furniture is? You should have left it to me then, madam, who do know what they are, but you would be parsimonious, and consequently lend it usury. I have done wrong, Monsieur Porthos, but I will repair that wrong. Upon my word of honor, I will." "And how will you do that?" asked the Musketeer. "Listen to me. This evening, Monsieur Coquenard is going to the house of Monsieur le Duc Deschamps, who has sent for him. It is upon a consultation which will last 3 hours at least. Come, we shall be alone and can make up your accounts." "Ah, now that is speaking to the purpose, my dear. You pardon me then. We shall see," said Porthos majestically, and they separated, both saying, "Till this evening." "The devil," thought Porthos as he walked away. "It appears I am getting near to Monsieur Coquenard's strong box at last." Chapter 35. A Gascon, a match for Cupid. On the morning following the evening so fondly anticipated by both Porthos and D'Artagnan, Athos sat chewing the cud of recollections, in which the bitter somewhat predominated over the sweet, when his meditations were pleasingly interrupted by the appearance of D'Artagnan. We say pleasingly for 2 reasons. First, that Athos took particular pleasure in the society of the frank, shrewd Gascon, and secondly, that though the circumstances of his early life had cast a tinge of melancholy over his tone of mind and altered his habits of existence, there was still a spirit of comparative youth and a natural buoyancy of temperament which made him hail as the relief the society of a man he esteemed so greatly as he did D'Artagnan. As to the Gascon, he was in exuberant spirits, but spirits which, to the cool, observant eye of Athos, seemed rather feverish than natural. His eyes sparkled, his tongue was voluble, his laugh was loud, but there was occasionally a nervous twitching of the muscles of the mouth, and altogether an uneasiness which denoted that his spirits resembled rather the excitement produced by opium or wine than the overflowing, colorful cheerfulness of youth and peace of mind. "This seems to have been an auspicious night with you, D'Artagnan," said Athos. "Oh yes," replied D'Artagnan, rubbing his hands, "and my revenge is complete." "Ah," said Athos gravely, "beware, revenge is an awkward passion to indulge in. They who employ it find a double-edged weapon, which in the recoil frequently wounds the hand that wields it. I must confess that I am not quite at ease. Milady has a deal more of a Sergei than a Venus in her. However beautiful I think her. Her very love and its expression have something mysterious in them. Well, we know she was a spy of the Cardinal, said Athos. The Cardinal does not usually employ lovable people. A few of us would like to take either Lapierre Joseph or his Ame Domne Rochefort to our bosoms as confidential friends, and a woman must be still more to be dreaded. With men we can be on our guard, against women never. Said D'Artagnan, that is it. I almost trembled while I loved. She has the strangest expression in her eyes I ever met with. Though merely gray eyes, their brilliancy is astonishing, but that brilliancy is more of the nature of the flash of a meteor than of the moon-like luster we love in women's eyes. But I will tell you all, and then you may judge for yourself. And with his usual readiness and fluency, the Gascon related his attentive friend the adventures of the evening. In the first place, he recapitulated all that our readers know concerning the lady's warm letters to De Wardes and D'Artagnan's forged reply. At this period, Athos's brow became clouded. In general, the eye of Athos seemed to turn about toward. At this period, Athos's brow became clouded. In general, the eye of Athos seemed to turn toward D'Artagnan as the weary look of the town drudge seeks a break between the line of houses where he can catch a glimpse of green fields and golden sunshine. But now it was serious to sternness. My dear friend, this is not like you. You are naturally no assassin. Though anxious to win the fight, you would never forget that honor should be dearer to a combatant than victory. But look at the consequence of this victory. For the sake of a momentary gratification, you secure yourself an enemy, and no mean one, depend upon it. Oh, said D'Artagnan, I have felt all that, but Athos, you know what it is to be under the influence of a beautiful, artful woman. The brow of Athos again darkened, but proceed, added he gravely. Well, at my usual time, about 9 o'clock, I presented myself and was almost flattered into hope by my reception. I had never seen her look handsome. Her spirits were good, her laugh was cheerful, and there was none of that constrained, affected air of politeness of which I had before seen so much. But then the devil of jealousy did not fail to whisper to me that all this arose from the anticipation of gratified love, and was not in any way due to me or my presence. But passion is a bad reasoner, and I said to myself, well, she may love De Wardes, but if she will take all this pains to make herself agreeable to me, I must go for something. And she may not take the deception very ill. Besides, he was hard to be courted. I was a willing slave. There, your usually acute philosophy was at fault, D'Artagnan. As a soldier, you ought to know there is more honor from a contested victory than from a too easy surrender. But go on. Well, I perceived my billet had done its work. Kitty was ordered to bring in the sherbet. Her mistress's good humor extended even to her. She spoke more kindly to her than usual, but I could see poor Kitty was insensible to it all. Her heart seemed full of the idea of my purposed revenge. As I witnessed the play of natural feeling in the countenance of one of these women, and beheld the artful blandishment of that of the other, I was not only tempted to think that fortune had made a mistake in their relative positions, but even felt my heart waver and turn instinctively from art to nature. But I was committed, and had no means of honorable retreat before victory. At 10 o'clock my lady began to be uneasy. I could plainly see what was the matter. She arose, walked about, sat strange progress of the pendulum. At length, as the time drew near, there was no mistaking her. Her looks said distinctly his words, "You have been very agreeable, but it is quite time you were gone." I arose, took my hat, bowed upon her hand, even ventured to kiss it all, which she not only allowed, but I was astonished to find her beautiful fingers return the respectful pressure of mine. And yet, though the fascination still continued, I was not for a moment deceived. There was no partiality for me, not even coquetry in it. She must love him devilishly, thought I, as I descended the stairs. But my poor little kitty could not find it in her heart to come down to meet me. I was obliged to grope my way up the back staircase alone. On reaching this wretched little apartment, I found her seated with her head leaning on her hands, weeping bitterly. She did not notice my entrance, but when I went in a kindly manner to take her hand, and she broke into an agony of sobbing, I soon found from her reproaches that milady, in the delirium of her joy, had revealed to her the contents of the supposed Dewart's billet, and as a reward for the manner in which she performed her commission, had given her a purse of money. Kitty, on regaining her chamber, had thrown his purse contemptuously into a corner where it lay, disgorging 3 or 4 pieces of gold upon the carpet. My heart smote me more than I liked to own, but my plan lay too much at my heart. The only honest thing I could do toward Kitty was to give her clearly to understand that I could not draw back, that I must go on, only adding as a sedative that I was now actuated solely by revenge. From some little remains of modesty, milady had ordered all the lights to be extinguished, even in her own chamber, and Monsieur Dewart's was to depart before day in darkness. I had not been many minutes with Kitty before we heard milady enter her chamber, and I quickly ensconced myself in my closet. Indeed, Kitty had scarcely pushed me in when her mistress's little bell rang. Kitty replied to the summons, taking care to shut the door after her, but the wainscot was so thin I could hear almost all both the women said. Milady appeared intoxicated with joy. She made Kitty repeat the minutest details of her pretended interview with Dewart's, to which poor Kitty returned her broken answers, and I really expected from her tone she would begin to cry. And yet, so selfish is happiness, milady was too much engrossed by her own joy to mark the distress of her poor attendant. A few minutes before the appointed hour, milady had all the lights put out in her chamber and dismissed Kitty to hers, with an injunction to introduce the Count the moment he arrived. You may suppose I did not keep Kitty waiting long. Seeing through a chink in my hiding place that was all darkness, I was at the door of milady's chamber before Kitty had closed it. "What is that noise?" said milady. "It is I, Dewart's," replied I, in a suppressed voice. "Well, why does he not come in?" said milady. Shaking on poor Kitty with as much kindness as I could, I made my way into milady's chamber, and here, dear Athos, I must confess that I scarcely knew which predominated, love or jealousy. I had no idea what a man's feelings would be when he was passionate, when his passionate protestations of love poured into his ears, and knows that they are addressed to a rival. Oh, what a keen, remorseless tooth has jealousy! Her love for Dewart seems boundless. "Call it not love, D'Artagnan," said Athos. "It is a desecration of the word. Such natures as hers may be susceptible of coarse passion, but know nothing of love. Well, call it what you will, she is intensely in earnest, as you may judge. At parting, she forced this ring upon my finger with the request that I would return her a token of responding affection today, and people don't give such jewels as this away lightly. My heart smote me, and I wished to refuse it. She, however, would not hear of that, but replied, No, keep that ring for my sake, and you will render me likewise a greater service than you are aware of by doing so." And her voice was agitated as she spoke. What the latter part of her speech meant, I don't know. That she is full of mysteries. I remember the ring. It is, as you see, a magnificent sapphire surrounded by brilliants. At that moment I felt ready to reveal everything, but very strangely, she added. Poor dear angel, whom the monster of a Gascon was so near killing. Comfortable this, to know I was the monster. Do you suffer much from your wounds? Continued she. Yes, a great deal, said I, scarcely knowing what to answer. Be satisfied, murmured she, I will avenge you. And cruelly. Thought I to myself, the time for confidence has not yet come. At our parting, which was a passionate one, another interview was agreed upon for next week. Your milady is doubtless an infamous creature, but since you mentioned it, my attention has been engrossed by your ring, said Athos. I saw you were looking at it. It is handsome, is it not? Said D'Artagnan. Yes, said Athos, magnificent. It reminds me of a family jewel. I did not think two sapphires of such a fine water existed, and she gave you that ring, do you say? Yes, my beautiful Englishwoman, or rather Frenchwoman, for I am sure she was born in France, took it from her own finger and forced it onto mine. Let me look at it, said Athos, and as he took it and examined it, he became very pale. He tried it on his little finger, which it fitted as if made for it. A shade of anger and vengeance passed across his usually calm brow. It is impossible. It can be she, said he. How would this ring come into the possession of Lady Clarique? And yet it is difficult to suppose a true resemblance should exist between two jewels. Do you know this ring? Said D'Artagnan. I thought I did, replied Athos, but no doubt was mistaken. And he returned D'Artagnan the ring without, however, ceasing to look at it. Pray, said Athos after a minute, either take off that ring or turn the collet inside. It recalls such recollections that I cannot keep my head cool enough to converse with you. But stop, let me look at that ring again. The one I mentioned to you had one of its faces scratched. D'Artagnan took off the ring, giving it again to Athos. Athos started. Look, said he, is it not strange? And he pointed out to D'Artagnan the scratch he had remembered. But from whom did this ring come to you, Athos? From my mother, who inherited it from her mother. And you sold it, said D'Artagnan hesitatingly. No, replied Athos with a singular smile. I gave it away in a love affair, and it has been given to you. D'Artagnan became pensive in his turn. It appeared as if there were abysses in Milady's soul whose depths were dark and unknown. He took back the ring, but put it into his pocket and not on his finger. D'Artagnan, said Athos, taking his hand, you know I love you. If I had a son, I could not love him better. Take my advice, renounce this woman. You are right, said D'Artagnan. I have done with her. She terrifies me. Shall you have the courage, said Athos. I shall, replied D'Artagnan instantly. In truth, my young friend, you will act rightly, and God grant that this woman who has scarcely entered into your life may not leave a terrible trace in it. And Athos bowed to D'Artagnan like a man who wishes to be left alone with his thoughts. On reaching home, D'Artagnan found Kitty waiting for him. She was sent by her mistress to the vaults stewards. Her mistress was mad with love. She wished to know when her lover would meet her again, and poor Kitty, pale and trembling, awaited D'Artagnan's reply. The counsels of his friend joined the cries of his own heart, made him determined now his pride was saved and his vengeance satisfied, not to see Milady again. As a reply, he wrote the following letter. Do not depend upon me, madam, for the next meeting. Since my convalescence, I have so many affairs of this kind on my hands that I am forced to regulate them a little. When your turn comes, I shall have the honor to inform you of it. I kiss your hands. They won't. Not a word about the ring. Was the Gascon determined to keep it as a weapon against Milady? Or else, let us be frank, did he not reserve the jewel as a last recourse for the equipment? We should be wrong to judge the actions of one period from the point of view of another. That which would now have considered as disgraceful to a gentleman was at that time a simple and natural affair, and the cadets of the best families were frequently kept by their mistresses. D'Artagnan gave the open letter to Kitty, who at first was unable to comprehend it, but who became almost wild with joy on reading it a second time. She could scarcely believe in her happiness, and whatever might be, considering the violent character of Milady, the danger of which the poor girl incurred, mistress, she ran back to the Place Royale as fast as her legs could carry her. Milady opened the letter with eagerness, but at the first words she read, she became livid. She crushed the paper in her hand, and turning with flashing eyes upon Kitty, "What is this letter?" cried she. "The answer to Madam's," replied Kitty, all in a tremble. "Impossible!" cried Milady. "It is impossible a gentleman could have written such a letter to a woman." Then all at once started. "My God!" cried she, "can he have—" And she stopped. She ground her teeth. She was of the color of ashes. She endeavored to go toward the window for air, but she could only stretch forth her arms. Her legs failed her, and she sank into a fauteuil. Kitty, fearing she was going to faint, hastened toward her and was beginning to open her dress, but Milady started up, pushing her away. "What do you want with me?" said she, "and why do you place your hand on me?" "I thought you were going to faint, Milady," answered the terrified girl. "I faint? Do you take me for a weak, a silly woman, then? When I am insulted, I do not faint. I avenge myself." And she made a sign for Kitty to leave the room. Chapter 36. Dream of Vengeance. That evening, Milady gave orders that when Monsieur D'Artagnan came as usual, he should be immediately admitted, but he did not come. The next day, Kitty went to see the young man again and related to him all that had passed on the preceding evening. D'Artagnan smiled. This jealous anger of Milady was his revenge. That evening, Milady was still more impatient than on the preceding one. She renewed the order relative to the Gascon, but as before, she expected him in vain. The next morning, when Kitty presented herself at D'Artagnan's residence, she was no longer joyous and alert, as she had been on the 2 preceding days, but on the contrary, as sad as possible. D'Artagnan asked the poor girl what was the matter with her, but she, as her only reply, drew a letter from her pocket and gave it to him. This letter was in Milady's handwriting, only this time it was addressed to Monsieur D'Artagnan and not to Monsieur de Wardes. He opened it and read as follows: "Dear Monsieur D'Artagnan, it is wrong thus to neglect your friends, particularly at the moment you're about to leave them for so long a time. My brother-in-law and myself expected you yesterday and the day before, but in vain. Will it be the same this evening? You're very grateful, Lady Glorique." "That's all very simple," said D'Artagnan. "I expected this letter. My credit rises by the fall of that of the Count de Wardes." "And will you go?" asked Kitty. "Listen to me, my dear girl," said the Gascon, who sought for an excuse in his own eyes for breaking the promise he had made Athos. "You must understand it would be impolite not to accept such a positive invitation. Milady, at not seeing me come again, would not be able to understand what could cause the interruption of my visits, and might suspect something. Who could say how far the vengeance of such a woman would go?" Oh dear, said Kitty, "you know how to represent things in such a way that you are always in the right. You are going now to pay your court to her again, and if this time you succeed in pleasing her in your own name and with your own pace, it will be much worse than before." Instinct caused poor Kitty to guess a part of what was going to happen. D'Artagnan reassured her as well as he could and promised to remain insensible to the seductions of Milady. He desired Kitty to tell her mistress that he could not be more grateful for her kindness than he was, that he would be obedient to her orders, but he did not dare to write for fear of not being able to such experienced eyes as those of Milady to disguise his writing sufficiently. As 9 o'clock struck, D'Artagnan was at the Palace Royale. It was evident that the servants who waited in the antechamber were warned, for as soon as D'Artagnan appeared, before even he had asked if Milady were invisible, one of them ran to announce him. "Show him in," said Milady in a quick tone, but so piercing that of sleep. The number of lights had been intentionally diminished, but the young woman could not conceal the traces of the fever which had devoured her during the last 2 days. D'Artagnan approached her with his usual gallantry. She then made an extraordinary effort to receive him. But never did a more distressed countenance give the lie to a more amiable smile. To the questions which D'Artagnan put concerning her health, "Ill," replied she, "very ill." Then replied he, "My visit is ill-timed. You, no doubt, stand in need of repose, and I will not intrude longer." "No, no," said Milady. "On the contrary, stay, Monsieur D'Artagnan. Your agreeable company will divert me." Oh, thought D'Artagnan, she has never been so kind before. I must be on my guard. Milady assumed the most agreeable air possible and conversed with more than her usual brilliancy. At the same time, the fever, which for an instant abandoned her, returned to give luster to her eyes, color to her cheeks, and vermilion to her lips. D'Artagnan was again in the presence of the Circe, who had before surrounded him with her enchantments. His love, which he believed to be extinct, but which was only asleep, awoke again in his heart. Milady smiled, and D'Artagnan felt that he could damn himself for that smile. There was a moment at which he felt something like remorse. By degrees, Milady became more communicative. She asked D'Artagnan if he had a mistress. "Alas," said D'Artagnan with the most sentimental air he could assume, "can you be cruel enough to put such a question to me? To me, from the moment I saw you, have only breathed and sighed by you and for you." Milady smiled with a strange smile. "Then you do love me," said she. "Have I any need to tell you so? Can you have failed to perceive it?" "Perhaps I have, but you know the more hearts are worth the capture, the more difficult they are to be won." "Oh, difficulties do not affright me," said D'Artagnan. "I shrink before nothing but impossibilities." "Nothing is impossible," replied Milady, "to true love." "Nothing, madam, nothing," replied Milady. "The devil," said D'Artagnan. Thought D'Artagnan, "the note is changed. Can she be going to fall in love with me by chance, despair inconstant, and be disposed to give me myself another sapphire like that which she gave me for rewards?" D'Artagnan drew his seat nearer to Milady's. "Well, now let us see what you would do to prove this love of which you speak." "All that could be required of me in order, I am ready. For everything." "For everything," said D'Artagnan, who knew beforehand that he had not much to risk in engaging himself thus. "Well, now let us talk a little seriously," said Milady, in her turn drawing her fauteuil nearer to D'Artagnan's chair. "I am all attention, madam," said he. Milady remained thoughtful and undecided for a moment. Then, as if appearing to have formed a resolution, "I have an enemy," said she. "You, madam," said D'Artagnan, affecting surprise. "Is that possible? My God, good and beautiful as you are." "A mortal enemy, indeed, an enemy who has insulted me cruelly. So cruelly that between him and me it is war to the death. May I reckon on you as an auxiliary?" D'Artagnan at once perceived what the vindictive creature was coming to. "You say you may, madam," said he with emphasis. "My arm and my life are yours, as my love is." "Then," said Milady, "since you are as generous as you are loving—" She stopped. "Well," demanded D'Artagnan. "Well," replied Milady, after a moment of silence, "from the present time cease to talk of impossibilities." "Do not overwhelm me with happiness," cried D'Artagnan, throwing himself on his knees, covering with kisses the hands she did not attempt to withdraw. "Avenge me of that infamous award," said Milady to herself, "and I shall soon know how to get rid of you, double fool, living sword blade." "Fall voluntarily into my arms," said D'Artagnan likewise to himself, "after having abused me with such effrontery. Hypocritical, dangerous woman, and afterward I will laugh as you with him you wish me to kill." D'Artagnan lifted up his head. "I am ready," said he. "You have understood me then, dear Monsieur D'Artagnan," said Milady. "I can understand one of your looks. Then you would employ on my account your arm, which has already acquired so much renown." "Instantly. But on my part," said Milady, "how should I repay such a service?" "I know what lovers are. They are men who do nothing for nothing. You know the only reply that I desire, said D'Artagnan, the only one worthy of you and me. And he drew nearer to her. She did not retreat. Interested man, she cried, smiling. Ah, cried D'Artagnan, really carried away by the passion this woman had the power to kindle in him. Ah, that is because my happiness appears so impossible to me, and I have such fear that it should fly away from me like a dream, that I pant to make a reality of it. Well, merit the pretended happiness then. I am at your orders, said D'Artagnan. Quite certain, said Milady, with a last doubt. Only name to me the base man that has brought tears into your beautiful eyes. Who told you that I had been weeping, said she. It appeared to me, such women as I am don't weep, said Milady. So much the better. Come, tell me what his name is. Remember that his name is all my secret, yet I must know his name. Yes, you must. See what confidence I have in you. You overwhelm me with joy. What is his name? You know him. Indeed. Yes, it is surely not one of my friends, replied D'Artagnan, affecting hesitation in order to make her believe him ignorant. If it were one of your friends, you would hesitate then, cried Milady, and a threatening glance darted from her eyes. Not if it were my own brother, cried D'Artagnan, as if carried away by his enthusiasm. Our Gascon advanced this without risk, for he knew all that was meant. I love your devotedness, said Milady. Alas, do you love nothing else in me, said D'Artagnan, and the warm pressure made D'Artagnan tremble as if by the touch that fever which consumed Milady was communicated to him. You love me, you, cried he. Oh, if that were so, I should lose my reason. And he folded her in his arms. She made no effort to remove her lips from his kisses, only she did not respond to them. Her lips were cold. It appeared to D'Artagnan that she had embraced a statue. That he had embraced a statue, he was not the less intoxicated with joy, electrified by love. He almost believed in the tenderness of Milady. He almost believed in the crime of De Wardes. If De Wardes had at that moment been under his hand, he would have killed him. Milady seized the desired moment. His name is, said she in her turn. De Wardes, I know it, cried D'Artagnan. And how do you know it? Asked Milady, seizing both his hands and endeavoring to read with her eyes to the bottom of his heart. D'Artagnan felt he had allowed himself to be carried away, and that he had committed an error. Tell me, I say, repeated Milady. How do you know it? How do I know it? Said D'Artagnan. Yes, I know it because yesterday Monsieur de Wardes in a salon where I was showed a ring which he said he had of you. Miserable scoundrel, cried Milady. The epithet, as may be easily understood, resounded to the very bottom of the heart of D'Artagnan. Well, continued she. Well, I will avenge you of this miserable scoundrel, replied D'Artagnan, giving himself to the airs of Don Japhet of Armenia. Thanks, my brave friend, cried Milady, and when shall I be avenged? Tomorrow, immediately, when you please. Milady was about to cry out immediately, but she reflected that such precipitation would not be very gracious toward D'Artagnan. Besides, she had 1,000 precautions to take, 1,000 counsels to counter her defender in order that he might avoid explanations with the Count before witnesses. All this was answered by an expression of D'Artagnan's. Tomorrow, said he, avenged, or I shall be dead. No, said she, you will avenge me, but you will not be dead. He is a contemptible fellow. Toward women he may be, but not toward men. I know something. But it seems that you had not much to complain of your fortune in your contest with him. Fortune is a courtesan, though favorable yesterday. She may turn her back tomorrow, which means that you now hesitate. No, I do not hesitate, God forbid, but would it be just to allow me to go to a possible death without having given me at least something more than hope? Milady answered by a glance which said, Is that all? Speak then, and then accompanying the glance with the explanatory words. That is but too just, said she tenderly. Oh, you are an angel, exclaimed the young man. Then all is agreed, said she, except that which I ask of you, dear love. But when I tell you that you may rely show the Chevalier the way. And this evening at 11 o'clock, you have heard what I said. It appears that these appointments are all made for 11 o'clock, dear Dagnan. That's a settled custom. Milady held out her hand to him, which he kissed tenderly, but said he was retired as quickly as possible from the purchase of Kitty. But I must not play. This is certainly a very bad one. I must be upon my guard. Chapter 37, Milady's Secret. D'Artagnan left the hotel instead of going up at once to Kitty's chamber as she endeavored to persuade him to do, and that for two reasons. The first, because by this means he should escape reproaches, recriminations, and prayers. The second, because he was not sorry to have an opportunity of examining his own thoughts and endeavoring, if possible, to fathom those of this woman. What was the most clear in the matter was that D'Artagnan loved Milady like a madman, and that she did not love him at all. In an instant, D'Artagnan perceived that the best way in which he could act would be to go home and write Milady a long letter in which he would confess to her that he and De Wardes were, up to the present moment, the same, and that consequently he could not undertake without committing suicide to kill the Count de Wardes. But he also was spurred on by a ferocious desire of vengeance. He wished to subdue this woman in his own name, and as suspensions appeared to him to have a certain sweetness in it, he could not make up his mind to renounce it. He walked 6 or 7 times around the Place Royale, turning at every 10 steps to look at the light in Milady's apartment, which was to be seen through the blinds. It was evident that this time the young woman was not in such haste to retire to her apartment as she had been the first. At length the light disappeared. With this light was extinguished the last irresolution in the heart of D'Artagnan. He recalled to his mind the details of it the first night, and with a beating heart and a brain on fire, he re-entered the hotel and flew toward Kitty's chamber. The poor girl, pale as death and trembling in all her limbs, wished to delay her lover that Milady, in her ear on this watch, had heard the noise D'Artagnan had made, and opening the door, "Come in," said she. All of this was such incredible immodesty, of such monstrous effrontery, that D'Artagnan could scarcely believe what he saw or what he heard. He imagined himself to be drawn into one of those fantastic intrigues which we meet within our own dreams. He, however, darted not the less quickly toward Milady, yielding to that magnetic attraction which the lodestone exercises over iron. As the door closed after them, Kitty rushed toward it. Jealousy, fury, offended pride, all the passions, in short, that dispute the heart of an outraged woman in love, urged her to make a revelation. But she reflected that she would be totally lost if she confessed having assisted in such a machination, and above all, that D'Artagnan would also be lost to her forever. This last thought of love counseled her to make this last sacrifice. D'Artagnan, on his part, had gained the summit of all his wishes. It was no longer a rival that was beloved, it was he himself that was apparently beloved. A secret voice whispered to him at the bottom of his heart that he was but an instrument of vengeance, that he was only caressed till he had given death. But pride, but self-love, but madness silenced this voice and stifled its murmurs. And then our Gascon, with that large quantity of conceit which we know he possessed, compared himself with De Wardes, and asked himself why, after all, he should not be beloved for himself. He was absorbed entirely by the sensation of the moment. Milady was no longer fatal intentions who had for a moment terrified him. She was an ardent, passionate mistress, returning his love in full measure. But Milady, who had not the same motives for forgetfulness that D'Artagnan had, was the first to return to reality and asked the young man if the means which were on the morrow to bring on the re-encounter between him and De Wardes were already arranged in his mind. But D'Artagnan, whose ideas had been quite another course, forgot himself like a fool, and answered gallantly that that was not the time to think about duels and sword thrusts. This coldness for the only interest that occupied her mind terrified Milady, whose questions became more pressing. Then D'Artagnan, who had never seriously thought of this impossible duel, endeavored to turn the conversation, but he could not succeed. Milady kept him within the limits she had traced beforehand with her irresistible spirit and her iron will. D'Artagnan fancied himself very cunning when advising Milady to renounce by parting De Wardes the furious projects she had formed. But at the first word she started and exclaimed in a sharp, bantering tone which sounded strangely, "Are you afraid, dear D'Artagnan?" "You cannot think me so, dear love," replied D'Artagnan. "But now suppose this poor Count de Wardes should be less guilty than you imagine him to be." "At all events," said Milady seriously, "he has deceived me, and from the moment he deceived me, he merited death." "He shall die then, since you condemn him," said D'Artagnan in so firm a tone that it appeared to Milady the expression of a devotedness superior to every trial. This reassured her. Got a lovely, some artwork here. D'Artagnan recognized the mark which is impressed by the hand of the executioner. I think this might be for the next page, though. Yeah. When the faint light of dawn peeped through the blinds, Milady warned D'Artagnan that it was time to depart, not forgetting to remind him of his promise to avenge her on the Count de Wardes. "I am quite ready," said D'Artagnan, "but in the first place I should like to be certain of one thing." "And what is that?" asked Milady. "That is, whether you really love me." "You have little reason to ask such a question, I think." "Well, perhaps you do, and I am yours, body and soul." "Thanks, my brave lover, but as you are satisfied of my love, you must in your turn satisfy me of yours. Is not that just?" "Certainly, but if you love me as much as you say," replied D'Artagnan, "do you not entertain a little fear on my account?" "What have I to fear?" "Why, that I may be dangerously wounded, killed even." "Impossible," cried Milady. "You are such a valiant man, and such an expert swordsman." "You would not then prefer a means," resumed D'Artagnan, "which would equally avenge you while rendering the combat useless?" Milady looked at her lover in silence. The pale light of the first rays of day gave to her clear eyes a strangely frightful expression. "Really," said she, "I believe you now begin to hesitate." "No, I do not hesitate, but I really pity this poor Count de Wardes, since you have ceased to love him. I think that a man must be so severely punished by the loss of your love that he stands in need of no other chastisement." "Who told you that I have loved him?" asked Milady sharply. "At least I am now at liberty to believe without too much fatuity that you love another," said the young man in a caressing tone, "and I repeat that I am really interested for the Count." "You are?" asked Milady. "Yes, on what account?" "Because I alone know." "What?" "That he is far from me, or rather having been so guilty towards you as he appears to be." "Indeed," said Milady in an anxious tone. "Explain yourself, for I really cannot tell what you mean." And she looked at D'Artagnan. "And yes, I am a man of honor," said D'Artagnan, determined to come to an end. "And since your love is mine, I am satisfied I possess it. For I do possess it, do I not? Entirely. Go on." "Well, I feel as if it transformed. A confession weighs on my mind." "A confession? If I had the least doubt of your love, I would not make it. But you love me, do you not?" "Without doubt I do." "Then if, through excessive love, I have rendered myself culpable towards you, you will pardon me?" "Perhaps." D'Artagnan, as resumed his most winning smile, but had no effect. He had alarmed Milady, and she involuntarily turned from him. "This confession," said she, growing paler and paler. "What is this confession? You gave towards a meeting on Thursday last in this very room, did you not?" "I? No, certainly not," said Milady in a tone of voice so firm, and with a countenance so unchanged, that if D'Artagnan had not been in such perfect possession of the fact, he would have doubted. "Do not say that which is not true, my angel," said D'Artagnan, smiling. "That would be useless." "What do you mean? Speak. You terrify me to death." "Be satisfied. You are not guilty toward me. I have already pardoned you." "What next? What next? De Wardes cannot boast of anything." "How is that? You told me yourself that ring I have, the Count de Wardes of last Thursday and the D'Artagnan of today are the same person." The imprudent young man expected a surprise mixed with shame, a slight storm which would resolve itself into tears, but he was strangely deceived, and his error was not of long duration. Pale and trembling, Milady repulsed D'Artagnan's attempted embrace by a violent blow on the chest as she sprang from him. It was then broad daylight. In his eagerness to detain her, D'Artagnan had grasped her dress, but the frail cambric could not stand against two such strong wills. It was torn from her fair round shoulders, and to his horror and astonishment, D'Artagnan recognized upon one of them, indelibly branded, the mark which is impressed by the ignominious hand of the executioner. So yes, that's what this picture is of. "Great God!" cried D'Artagnan, losing his hold and examining mute, motionless, and frozen. But Milady felt herself denounced by his terror. Even he had doubtless seen all. The young man now knew her secret, her terrible secret, the secret she concealed even from her maid with such care, the secret of which all the world, excepting he, was ignorant. She turned upon him no longer like a furious woman, but like a wounded panther. "Ah, wretch!" cried she, "thou hast basely betrayed me. Thou hast basely betrayed me, and still more, thou hast my secret, thou shalt die." And she flew to a little inlaid casket which stood upon the toilet, opened it with a feverish and trembling hand, drew from it a small poniard with a golden haft and a sharp thin blade, and then threw herself with a bound upon D'Artagnan. Although the young man was, as we know, brave, he was terrified at that wild countenance, those terribly dilated pupils, those pale cheeks, and those bleeding lips. He drew back to the other side of the room as he would have done from a serpent which was crawling toward him, and his sword coming in contact with his nervous hand, he drew it almost unconsciously from the scabbard. But without taking any heed of the sword, Milady endeavored to get near enough to him to stab him, and did not stop till she felt the sharp point at her throat. She then endeavored to seize the sword with her hands, but D'Artagnan kept it free from her grasp and continued to present the point, sometimes at her eyes, sometimes at her breast, while she aimed at making his retreat by the door which led to Kitty's apartment. Milady, during this time, continued to strike at him with her dagger with horrible fury, screaming in a superhuman manner. As all this, however, bore some resemblance to a duel, D'Artagnan soon began to recover himself. "Very well, pretty lady, very well," said he, "but pardieu, if you don't calm yourself, I will mark you with a second fleur-de-lis upon one of those pretty cheeks." "Scoundrel, infamous scoundrel!" howled Milady. But D'Artagnan, still keeping on the defensive, drew near to Kitty's door. At the noise they made, she, in overturning the furniture in her efforts to get at him, he, in screening himself behind the furniture to keep out of her reach, Kitty, in great alarm, opened the door. D'Artagnan, who had constantly maneuvered to gain this point, was not at more than 3 paces from it. With one spring, he flew from the chamber of Milady into that of the maid, and quick as lightning, he slammed to the door and placed all his weight against it while Kitty bolted it. Then Milady attempted to tear down the door case with a strength apparently above that of a woman, but finding she could not accomplish this, she, in her fury, stabbed voice as soon as the bolts were fast. "Let me get out of the hotel, for if we leave her time to turn around, she will have me killed by the servants." "But you can't go out so," said Kitty. "You have hardly any clothes on." "That's true," said D'Artagnan. Then, first thinking of the costume he appeared in, "That's true, but dress me as well as you are able. Only make haste. Think, my dear girl, it's life and death." Kitty was but too well aware of that in a moment. She muffled him up in a large flowered robe, a capacious hood, and a cloak. She gave him some slippers, for which he placed on his naked feet, and then conducted him down the stairs. It was time. Milady had already rung her bell and roused the whole hotel. The porter was drawing the cord at the moment Milady cried from her window, "Don't open the gate! Don't open the gate!" The young man sprang out while she was still threatening him with an impotent gesture. At the moment she lost sight of him, Milady sank back, fainting into her chamber.